So do you guys use AI for client acquisition?
We do, and that's part of it. But the problem is with the marketing, with the virtual world, it's so inundated with stuff. They add so much noise to add very little signal. You selling yourself to like being part of that whole process is a kind of a guiding light.
I
And
love
for
that. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Interior Public Podcast. This is a show where we're discussing leadership, presence, and the inner architecture of influence in today's modern work world. So happy to have you all here with me today, and especially my special guest today is Ken Wessman. He is the Chief AI Officer at Big Kitty Labs. And I love that as a title. It's not one that I've heard very much, but I'm assuming that it's something we're going to hear more and more of. So I'd love to have you, Ken. Thank you for being here. Introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about what it is to be a Chief AI Officer in today's world.
Well, there's a little bit of ambiguity in that title, I think, as far as what constitutes AI. I think that's a bad term, as far as from the standpoint of computing and automation goes. At least for in my particular role, it still focuses around data science types of operations and kind of knowing, at least currently, you can consider me a lead researcher as well. So for the company for Big Kitty Labs, it was a classical software house, but the division that got stood up under me was specifically focused on machine learning and usage of deep neural networks in modern day. ChatGPT is a good example. Those are a transformer-based neural network, and that's what most people think of when they think about generative AI today. Is products like ChatGPT and these kind of chat clients. As far as my role goes, I touch a little bit of everything. We have a lot of different projects going on concurrently. One of them was local deployments of AI systems in on-premises microcloud systems, because one of the first things we saw was people were concerned about security and where their data was going to reside. And a simple way around that problem was to just put everything on premises. So, and also from our standpoint, understanding what the compute overhead looked like for the usage of these generative models locally, it was a good test bed for us with the partner that we have with the city of Hilliard, Ohio, near Columbus.
Okay.
A lot of startup companies were wanting to use it and to test the resources, and that computing cluster is getting larger and larger as we speak. So one of the offshoots of that is an actual branded product that we're working on as well for the deployment of ML pipelines or machine learning pipelines.
Okay.
But also, I'm also working with some other groups at the University of Cincinnati for actual algorithm development, which has to do with kind of mapping the semantic spaces, essentially the language spaces in these models. And I'll try not to be too much technical language, but the long and the short of it with these models is you hear about things like hallucination. That's kind of a misnomer. It's really understanding what the prediction spaces look like, and how to confine those. Another project that we're working on, and that's going to be a licensed project, is the usage of different types of algorithms in tandem with these generative models to kind of bind their output and to intelligently walk the output specifically. So besides that, approaches where I think the market's going to go, and then putting our staff on where I believe the market's going to go for generative AI pipelines and techniques. Being that, this has a lot of this has to do with most ML engineers are kind of like a software engineer that has, you can think of them as someone who has a real strong background in mathematical, stochastics, understanding of linear mapping spaces, those kind of things, higher order mathematics. So when we started putting the team together, the first people I put on team they were ML engineers, but ones that I felt had a really good grasping of abstract mathematics spaces, because I believe and it's coming to be proven more and more so that the transformers and these neural models are not going to be the end all be all, but they're going to be part of an ecosystem of models working in tandem, and that's how products are going to be developed from that standpoint. To where you use one model to generate output, you use other systems to correlate and categorize and restrict the spaces, so that you get consistent output out of the models, because of them being predictors, essentially next token predictors. The prediction spaces are not normalized. So like when I ask a question and you ask a question, you can look at it in a model in a ChatGPT stream, and the way that we weight our conversation actually changes the output in the models. And it's because of the fact that it's taking they do a very wonderful job at at being able to understand the nuances of language, but depending on the complexity and how long the amount of data that gets put into the models, the more that they tend to skew. It's called hallucination, but really it's kind of moving in higher dimensional prediction spaces. And you can think of as here I'm talking about a subject, and now I'm over here because humans tend to not constructively make thought patterns like linear. So when you go to talk to something, you're focused, and as far as you can think of as the centering around that idea space changes as you speak. And certain ideas decay, and other ones come into process. And even the way that language is, one of the interesting things with this algorithm development that we're working with this one group is I tried to figure out how the semantic space changes in time. And trying to understand these things through abstractions and the mathematics that lay behind them, I realized that humans construct language very much implicitly. We might have rules that we use to construct semantical arguments and semantical structures across these things, but those are a formalization of internal processes that a lot of it's implicit. So, like, when you go to think about it, go through a problem, you might you don't come about the answer to a problem in a linear manner. You might use the scientific method to come about it, but when people are discussing ideas, you're very much in a shared calculation space is a way to see it. So this has been a problem that I've been trying to tackle since really understanding what lies behind the basis of these models. But what I do think that you're gonna get this weird the synergy, I believe, with kind of understanding how humans formulate ideas in an explicit sense, being that language carries a lot of the structure of human civilization. It's in these models. People can say they're next token predictors, and I think that that's a very one-dimensional way to view these things because as information comes down into these spaces, they carry a lot of lineage to them, right? Like the transition between language spaces through time. And one of the things I realized that is an actual process that happens in real time through conversational streams. Like a definitional change in time as you're in that shared idea space, it has relevance in that time and in that context, and then it shifts out. The way that these models work with positional embeddings, especially transformers, how they kind of come about state memory, I guess you could call it. It's a way to look at it. They're really good for a certain point, but then as they get long-term dependencies, and that's what hallucination really is. I was working in one calculation space. Now I'm over here. Now I'm over here, and I'm wondering like, why is this model not understanding what I'm taking and trying to give to it to output? And it's because of the fact that humans correlate ideas all differently from one individual to another. So
Right. Like we can.
right. And so some of the techniques we used initially were like pattern nodes, and essentially we would use systems outside the generation of the models to either take information outside of it, like RAG systems, where we'll use maybe a sentence transformer, and we'll do a search, we'll rank the search, and then we'll use the LLM in tandem with it, and then we'll kind of like loop it through. Right. That was a approach that was for one project that we were doing, and I think that it solves some issues with like because you can get kind of like localized memory in a graph, right? Like because but as I realized, there's like I said, there's things that are missing in any one given technique. It's good for a certain portion of what's the real problem, and that's understanding essentially the fluidity with which humans can incorporate ideas and abstract. And that's something that's innate to us, but I think that these machines do a good job of mimicking that to an extent. But I think what you really need is you need other types of processes to map the topology of the semantic space different. That's how I see it, at least, and a way to triangulate movement there for the predictions, so that when it goes to you're going to do searching across that space, that you can get a better finite representation of the space, because these neural models have so many layers, and the weighting sequences, and being in the innate way that they work through these positional encodings, I can see a lot of variation and loss, and there is loss functions built into them for reasons, because there's what they call the curse of dimensionality. So those things are there.
Wait, did you just say the curse of that?
There's essentially too much information for the prediction sequences to kind of handle, right? So like you'll get normalization functions and those things. They're kind of built into the models. But yeah, a lot of this stuff is very abstract and still very new. So Lex Friedman podcast was one of the guys that started DeepMind. He was on, I believe, the CEO of DeepMind. They were doing algorithm mutation through the usage of, I believe, Markov decision trees. Don't quote me on that, but essentially taking an LLM, having it be like a context generator, and then using it with a predetermined stochastic mechanism to kind of walk the space and confine and generate. Because that's one of the things that they're really good at is context generation. Give a small amount of information and it'll predict in the sequence. Like I said, those things there's a lot for most neural models that, at least from my research that I've looked at, they all have their pluses and minuses for the kind of data that they handle. And with, and this is a personal belief that I have, is that, that there is a lot higher order geometric state, essentially representational language that's there that probably came about through language evolution, but that we can map those spaces a lot more succinctly. I don't believe that transformers are going to get us there currently, like I said, like ChatGPT variants. But I do believe that it's going to force algorithmic development. Even the usage of these models, you start thinking more about them, and being able to use artificial intelligence to compress information to build artificial intelligence is a thing that's being used already. They use agents to go out to try to readjust weights in the models, or essentially create their training data sets. They use it in the production of chips for artificial intelligence. There's a term, I can't remember what it's called. Essentially, artificial intelligence lithography. It's a way to actually to create new types of chips using artificial intelligence to optimize the production of artificial and silicon chips through the usage of artificial intelligence.
Wow.
It's like
That might have just
it's like an exponential thing. The tool itself has become part of improving the tool. Like, right, that you can use the tool to actually improve the models.
to build the tool.
Yeah, right. I'm really excited for this time because I think you're going to get people from disparate disciplines who are going to have their hands in this space, and they're going to make the space grow. Like, I was actually originally going to school for material sciences is what I wanted to do, which was heavily math laden. But even back when I first started, I knew that simulation for large scale computational networks was going to be necessary for chemical simulation, sequencing, like how to construct different types of lattices for complete processing chips. So my background isn't specifically in computer science, but all these things are factored into it. Simulation, mathematics, large scale compute, so things that I was already interested in. And the language space, being that there's a weird intersection of people who use these models intuitively and they're really good at it. And I'm really captivated by that, because it's almost like I've seen a lot of people who can use these LLMs better than I can. And they do it intuitively because they have a better mastery of language than I do, at least formalization of language in a written sense than I do, I believe, right? But no, it's a very dynamic time in an emergent field to where I think a lot of boundaries in the commonplace viewpoints of who can be in this space, who's an expert in this space. You're always going to need computer software developers. I'm not going to say those people are never going to go away. But I see these things as such an augmentation tool to humans' usage that we're going to end up having. Like, my eventual usage, I really want to use these things in the future is for physics research, personally, working on mathematical problems that are really complex to try to suss them out. And in a way, being that you can store your chat histories and expound upon them, now it's like you're able to offload a lot of your memory. Now, there's some drawbacks with that, right? Like, you don't want to all your cognitive power into a machine, but I believe them as a force multiplier. No one can deny that. We work with large scale companies, small companies. We do a lot with prototyping. So it's a really good environment for me because we work with a lot of founders and people who are bringing ideas to fruition. So we take a lot of people's ideas and we try to get them from their higher order representation of what they think their view and their vision is, and try to bring it home to something that can be built. Me, because of the fact that I'm a researcher by nature, a lot of times that part of the workflow I'm not as involved in, but we have really a great group of people that internally that are really succinct at being able to take an idea, actualize it, look what it's going to look like from an estimation point of view, and then turn out a good product. Our lab's it was a classical software lab that I came to work for. And then this division, I kind of got stood up. And then in the internal workings, we work with a lot of entrepreneurs in medical space near Columbus and Dayton area. That's called the aerospace corridor. So we also work with a lot of groups outside of them. Not only is the way that our company works, we work with a lot entrepreneurs, startups. We've worked with large scale uh, insurance companies, medical companies, farming companies. At least their essentially their Rolodex, if you think of it, that is that they've done a lot of things over probably over a 15-year period. This division was kind of new, and we slated most of our work on artificial intelligence as an industry, trying to understand the newer types of techniques. My very nature is I'm a researcher. Like that's always going to be my first love. So I'm not the best coder, but I'm very good at the abstraction across all portions of things. So like for me, I'm in a good role because I knew that I had instincts about, well, eventually smaller LLMs are going to be necessary for on-premises to be for isolation, and the ability to democratize things like with Hugging Face has come about, and to kind of understand that part of this is a computational scaling problem. Part of this is an understanding of the abstract spaces that exist in these neural networks. So the team that we put together initially was, like I said, heavily scientifically. That's what their skill sets were.
Right.
And we've done some very neat projects over the course of that, things that have to do with biblical works, because the semantic space in that is very complex. It spans time and the nuance of language changes. So that was one of the very first projects we worked on. That was this is an ongoing one currently. And to understand how the prediction spaces for these models worked, we learned a lot through the usage of those things, and how to kind of confine the output, normalize the output from these models, and how to build applications around them. So now we build a lot of companies are wanting to usually have a chatbot type neural the usage of an LLM embedded in an application, either for tagging and categorization, general knowledge, querying, or if we can do things like allow the LLMs to like grade outputs from things. It does very well in the understanding the semantic space to an extent. Like I said, if you put in a very structured piece of text, it can usually follow the structure of the text pretty well, and generate a decent output. But our lab, we have various disciplined coders of, like I said, of different stacks, and we've done a lot of neat stuff since I've been here.
Sounds
So,
fascinating. It sounds like
and
you're
one of the things that's been pretty prevalent as of late have been these low code generators that people are using. So some people are asking us specifically to use those, or can we use those, so they can cut down on the overhead costs, because classically software development is a very expensive thing. It takes for a fully fledged, really good product that's scalable, and that's had proper testing done with it on a scale up to scale. That takes time, and a lot of people that are trying to produce minimum viable products or MVPs, they have to show the functionality set of what's their differentiator, so they can go to venture capital funding, right? So we also work with groups around understanding what's available to them through grants, through federal and local grants. So one thing that's the founder of my lab, Tushar Kulkarni, has done is he's kind of been a champion of innovation in the area. And we have a real community of people that have developed around these shared goals and visions. Another company, UB here, as a contractor or a company that we work with directly, that's based on vision-based artificial intelligence. So they work in the military space through drone technology, object detection, those kind of things. Like I said, for visual spaces. We also work with the startup accelerators. We have a really close relationship with the startup accelerators that are around our areas, and the grants that are available to get, because we have OSUs relatively close to us. Being that we're kind of, and like I said, we're kind of in the aerospace corridor, there's a lot of military-based companies or educational institutes that work in the military space, and artificial intelligence has actually been in those spaces longer than in regular markets. But I really believe the shift is that people are at least getting somewhat of a preliminary understanding of what's available just through the usage of these things. But with all these things that are being brought to market, the acceleration of projects and products is coming quicker and quicker. So we can go from an MVP to show at least a feature set, or at least a mock-up of the feature set relatively quick. And then we can take it to a full-fledged project and explain, what we think what the viability is for those as well, because the attrition rate for startups is very brutal, to be frank.
right.
The biggest part of them, even if they get the initial fund of capital, getting to market there's so many competitors to get things to market, that trying to come about an idea and keep an idea long enough before someone else hits on it's very, very slim. Like, what I see that I think is going to be the next real phase, and this is other people have spoken about this, is not my idea, but I think it rings true, is AI from the ground up applications. The whole focus on is the generative AI aspects of the application and what it can facilitate for functionality's sake. Like, I'm assuming you're going to see email clients, word editors, that their whole back end is going to be based around the idea of generation, of confining, using the generative output of these large models, and then how to confine them into structured sequences, or, be it legal or medical, et cetera, et cetera. One of the problems currently with the regulated spaces is these large scale models are kind of black boxes. So the military and these medical places, they're trying to understand what reasoning goes through them to come up with their answers is of paramount importance to people that are in places that are regulated, because you don't want these things to predict incorrect things for control systems or any of the above. That's why I think mappable algorithms and data models outside of these things in tandem with them are really where the next phase of the industry is going to go, as far as AI centric types of approaches to products. Because that way you use the LLM to kind of walk whatever space behind, like whatever the model is outside of here, in a deterministic way, so that any algorithmic approaches or functionality can be tracked, and then the model kind of just acts as not your arbiter, but the thing that walks those spaces. And then you could look at, like, how did it come about? Because, well, we know it came about this is because we're using outside routines that bind it to this, and it only follows the directives we give it. So when we go to say, okay, well, it came about this through some statistical mapping, it's like, well, we know how this statistical mapping works out here. All the LLM did was repeat what we did. But what we can do is we can use it to take things from outside systems and maybe even mutate that data a little bit. I think that's another thing you're going to see it taking and using it as the context generation portion of it to take model data outside of it and to augment that. Like, I've seen there was some malware, this was like some of the very first stuff that was dangerous. I think it was called malware GPT. And basically what it did was it altered its approach to attack surfaces. And the variability that existed with that, it was able to do exploit systems in ways that kind of mimic what a human could do, right? Like, look at the attack surfaces differently. So I think that being that there's so much predictive might inside the models, that there's a lot of things that they could do. So I'm really interested to see how different models are going to work together in tandem, and what those kind of applications are going to be. And I believe that once we get better representations of how the semantic space is traversed and how the predictions are made, through finite functions, or at least through finite algorithms, that we will that we'll get to the predictability out of the models and understand how they came to their conclusions. And I think that's really, we need a way to audit the logic that doesn't currently exist, but it's on the move now.
Wow.
Like, I might tend to drift a bit, but it's just I'm trying to correlate a lot of things that I'm working on.
No, it's fascinating. And what's the biggest challenge that you guys are facing right now?
Well, I think for one thing, the client acquisition in the software space is always a tough thing, because there's so many big corporations that you have to deal with, right? And to try to convince companies that have new ideas, they're always going to implement the newest and latest and greatest that's available. Seldom do you see that with companies that are entrenched in either the production spaces or those kind of things, because anytime regulation enters in, those are kind of barriers to change, right? Like, if I go to, like, HIPAA is a great example, right? Like, if I'm going to get into the medical space, I have to deal with companies like Epic and these huge monoliths that have existed in the space for a long time. The whole industry is centered around their technologies, right? And same thing with big data. Oracle and companies like IBM, these are powerhouse companies. I mean, it's the reason why they acquire so many things. And they have the buying power to say, buy Red Hat or buy HashiCorp or whatever, and then just to fold them underneath their umbrella. But as it stands with those industries, you have to compete against those.
Right.
But what I do believe is that there's segments and niches in the market that are what they said, there's riches in the niches. I've heard that before, and I really believe that there's a lot of that available, to where you can find a subset of the market that's not being serviced and come about an idea to say, okay, this is what the market scale size looks like. what would it cost me for me to bring to market? And I think that's, to be honest, I don't ever think from the standpoint of a business from startups. I think one of the key failings, and I know it's a complicated thing, is to strike the timing right with the resources right, so that um, you don't get either bogged down in the production of what your company needs to build its product and what it takes to take it to market, and to find the right market segment. That's a balance that's very difficult. And the people that hit on it right, it's amazing to watch when they can. I know that a lot of the people that we've seen that have done the best as far as in the startup space are usually people who are a subject matter expert, have worked with tools in the industry, and they know the deficits in the industry, and then they hone in on that. And because they've been in the industry long enough to know, okay, these are the technologies that facilitate X, and here's the holes in the technology.
Right.
But from a standpoint of us, client acquisition is always kind of tough.
So do you guys use AI for client acquisition?
We do, and that's part of it. But the problem is with the marketing, with the virtual world, it's so inundated with stuff. There's so much noise in advertisement, LinkedIn. Now that bots are in every virtual platform and social media platform, they add so much noise to add very little signal. So it's very hard to digital and marketing outreach used to be a lot easier when there wasn't so many people in the space. What I've seen is when we do a lot of events and things, and we yield better results from those because we get a personal connection to people and understand their problem, and you put a face to the company name.
Right.
And so we do a lot of the speaking events, those kind of things, so that we can meet people where they're at as far as where they're looking, what they're looking to produce, and to show what we can do. And being that we're not a product house, we have product arm that's kind of being worked up now. We're mainly a services company. It's very hard to position yourself to sell your services because you're trying to explain a very abstract set of skills with your team to say, okay, well, it's like very much you're selling your lab at that point. Like I know what our capacity is. These are the kind of products we've worked on, as opposed to if you're a product only company, you can take something in hand and say, this is what we build. And it's easier to market that. It's easier to, but product companies are expensive because you have to take a big risk in the production of your product. And then you got to figure out if you're going to take it to market, or you're going to be in a market that's got the same kind of products in it. And it takes a lot of cash, and it takes a lot of time and resources to go towards building those things. So you have to there's some deficits to that. But to me, the product side of things is important because most things in the companies, you might get some pairings where, like, Oracle's a product company by nature, but it also is a services company for the implementation. Like if you're a big company, you can get the Oracle, you're going to have an Oracle representative. They're going to come sell you something, and they can do a custom implementation of that. But they're focused on mainly like one market segment, databases, and they've been in it for a long time. And the startup space, people that we've seen that have been most successful is to find a product feature set that's not too unwieldy to manage, and then they can bring it to market, and it's a differentiator, and then they can say, okay, this is what it looks like, and we can prove that this works. But with us, I think we get a lot of people who have great ideas. It's just figuring out if they and we try to help these people along too. Is like, if you got an idea, it's great. How much has it been actualized? How much is it actually gonna? How much resources do you have? So I think that's another thing we pride our lab on, is that we try to meet people where they are financially too. It's like, I don't want to take your money if I feel like that you don't have a good run towards the end goal. Like, and we're not gonna tell you that this. Oh no, this is gonna be no. It's like, here's what the barriers are here. So our intake team does a does a very good job of trying to figure out what the feature set for the application looks like, and we try to give resources to people that we know. For people that we have direct connections with, that understand the grant space, what's available to you for venture capital funding. That when you go so that you're not set, so that you're set up for some success. You know,
Right.
Now that doesn't always work with people. Sometimes they want to push back and say that, this is, well, we know it can be done cheaper, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But we try to stand on the successes we've had with companies we've worked with, so that when we go to talk to these people, that, you come back and speak with us. And like I said, we have a pretty solid community of people that has been kind of built out, especially in the last couple of years,
Yeah.
through events that we sponsor, through connections to university. Like we work with the OSU student intern program, so we can get, so we can bring people on that have really good, we think have a talent in the areas, so that we're pretty locally plugged in the Columbus area and in Dayton area, in Cincinnati, that whole sphere around there. But we do have business interests in other places as well. But from the standpoint, I would say that's the most difficult. We can intake clients, but trying to understand what those clients' resources are is sometimes difficult to understand, and like where they're at in the process. So we try to do a fair bit of we do a lot of meetings to vet a lot of that stuff, just because it behooves us and behooves the client, so that they don't have a lot of liability with their money, and that their money's well spent. So we turn them on to grant programs for people, and like through the startup accelerators, like, well, we have enough experience in the area to know what a good startup looks like, or at least a plan, and then we can refer you to, say, Jumpstart or one of these other accelerators that are around the area, and we have a relationship with them.
So what would be like your one piece of advice for somebody who's got a really great idea that they're wanting to develop before they as they're just getting started?
I would say that, and this may sound very abstract, and I really believe that your product, you should carry an ethos with your product. It's a differentiator. A vision allows you to work longer hours, put more time and effort into it, because it's something very personal to you. The people that we've seen, at least from my experience, embody the values of what they're trying to bring. They're kind of inseparable from the product in a way. Like,
Yeah.
the very foundation, and I used to think that was funny, like, that you need because you go through these events, I've been through enough of them, where they say, well, you need to have a mission statement and kind of this kind of things. And I always thought that, those were like tertiary things. But what I realized, what implicitly was underneath that, was like, oh no, you need to embody a vision to bring it to reality. It's a core thing that has to happen. You have to say, okay, I believe in this as much as I believe in anything else, more so in my life. And then I'm going to carry that along with it. So a big part of it is you selling yourself, to like being part of that whole process as a kind of a guiding light,
I
and
love
for
that.
to bring a vision towards, because I think that's the only thing that weathers the storm, because
Right.
it's a brutal business. The IT industry is brutal. I mean, I've seen enough companies, that go through our doors to see the ups and downs that can come about, even for companies that are successful for a period of time. That's not a guaranteed success. Yeah, you're in a world with a lot of competitors, and I really think that the people who have like I said, a guiding vision, and an indelible belief in themselves are the ones that really end up winning. It's the ones that, for lack of a better term, they know how to win, because they embody like I said, they embody their ideas. And for me personally, I feel that this is a fundamental technology that's going to change this, how civilization structured. I'm a firm believer in that. I believe that
Oh,
the
yeah.
ability for intelligence per watt, if it's a good way to think of it, like, if you look at how long it takes for someone to go from, child to maturation, it's 18 years. How much energy, how much time, how much wealth to raise an individual who's cognitive. And even if we can mimic 30 or 40% of that functionality at a general scale, at a scale that it is available, is currently becoming available, I don't know what that means for the sciences in general. I know for me, I want to leverage these machines because it allows you to simulate so many different variations in nature, mimic systems to the point to where we're already mimicking biological processes in these things. And it's like, what's the upper limit of these of the models, if we can come about better algorithms, better understanding of the computational spaces? I don't know the answer to that. I really don't.
It's a
Especially with
fascinating question, though.
it is a fascinating question. And with the onset, we've been waiting for quantum computation to be around for a long time. But if you look at like what the scaling factors that quantum computational systems actually allow for some of the pet problems that they've done. And if we can build those things to scale, that's a force multiplier that I can't even comprehend. And that's another thing, is this weird intersection between understanding these abstract computational spaces and understanding how those kind of are embodied in quantum computational systems. That's a whole other, I think through this stuff, we're going to come about an understanding of a lot of systems through this, whatever this track in human history looks like, to kind of get an understanding of perhaps how thoughts generated, and where it comes from, the implicit to the explicit. There's a lot of questions I've thought about at nighttime. Not just from the technical aspect, but from from the aspect of what it means to have this kind of, the ability for this kind of intelligence
Well,
outside
like
of human.
philosophically, do you get that out into the world? Do you get to share that with and translate that with your clients, or with
I
your?
do. I try to share that with them. To me, it's like I'm trying to share a little bit of my world with them.
Right.
And I enjoy that portion, because to me, this is going to breach on it's going to breach on topics. I believe that humans the intrinsic questions about what it means to be human and what intelligence even is. I think that we're on the track to really understanding it differently. That's like one of the first things I grappled with was like the scaling issue problems when I looked at like the dimensionality of the sequences of a piece of text and how they were represented in these models. And I was like, oh man, trying to even like come about some kind of a an analogy or to understand the complex spaces at those higher orders, the scale was one of the first things I was like, wow, the scaling problems are huge with this. So it's no wonder the computational cost is so high because in order to get enough information into a model to train it and the iterative processes through it and the amount of calculations that are necessary based on the way they're built now. And then the second problem I came about with was, boy, the complexity in the semantic representation space for language it's kind of astounding to understand. Like I
Yeah.
started reading things about topological language topology, kind of understanding the encoding sequences that were used for these large oral models. And basically, I hit white papers. I read white paper after white paper after white paper, and like in a way, these are kind of personal problems in a way now that I'm trying to figure out. Like because to me, if we can get past things like the scaling issues, understanding the higher representation spaces and language, I don't think that just from a general intelligence standpoint for like what we're seeing for artificial intelligence is. I think that's just the start. Like it really begs the question what constitutes intelligence, what constitutes creativity, how thought is formed. And really, if you look at like, it's funny that these models, they kind of mimic humans in some ways, right? Like they'll
Totally.
lose memory, they'll lose context. You'll come about and have to reassess your ideas.
Well, it feels like they really are a mirror.
No, I really believe there's some validity in that. You wonder about how much of humanity is carried in its language, right, and in its works, right? Like, and
Mhm.
I don't know the answer to that. I mean, that's a very very abstract question in and of itself. If I have all of the works of Shakespeare, do I know Shakespeare? Like, I don't know. Like, I don't know how much of that's mimicked, caught in the language space itself, and that's one of the questions I to me is a fascinating space for me because it's like understanding that representation space, what's all in there, like it's because it is kind of it's caught in these mathematical abstractions at scale, and
But
it's
just
like I
the
said,
idea of translating.
it is, and like I said, I believe that that these are it's such a force multiplier for as
Right.
far as the augmentation on what humans, cognitive capacity is. If you look at like the idea of, like I said, we did a biblical project that we're still working on it. That's a very fascinating thing because things like parables are they're like a compute unit, right? When you drop and that's an amazing thing about a parable is that if you think about it, I think things in geometries. That's the makes the most sense to me. It's the most generic way to extrapolate these ideas.
Love
So
it.
like for at least for me. So if you think about the idea of a parable, you drop it into the language space, and the parable morphs itself to the context. And that's an amazing thing. I mean, think about it as a piece of technology. The reason why parables are ubiquitous across and they generate new meaning is because the language space mutates depending on how you interact with it. And like you said, a very shared space, like I'm Mary, you're Ken, and this abstraction, and then we take a set of axioms to be true implicitly as soon as we walk into there. I'm a Westerner, I'm Caucasian, so there's all this unconscious implicit structure that's being formed as the edifice for where we before we even start to converse. And one of the things I noticed that was like a discrepancy in the models was I was like when I started to read, right? It's like they have a very prescriptive tinge to them. So like and then I got to understanding more and more as I went to go read a book. I was like, oh, when I go to read a book, this is a search exercise. I put on the guise of whatever the character is in the book or whatever the vantage point is, and then I'm invited into that search for what the meaning is out of that book. Like you talk about subtext, right? It's there, but it's like it's not explicitly stated. But humans have been able through all of the axioms they carry with them into the situation of reading the book. How much of that's you're imprinting and how much of it's imprinted on you, I don't know. But I do know that it's an exercise with the information, and that space changes in real time as and as your understanding changes. That's why I'm really excited with some of this other work that we're doing. I think that if we can learn how to change the semantic space intrinsically as information gets dumped into it in different manners, then we'll start to really mimic how humans come to reason. And that to me, that's a fundamental question that I think everyone would want to know is like, what's the secret sauce that makes us different from a primate? And in real actuality, like, or in
Right.
other lower order life forms, if you want to call it that. But a story is a technology. A book is a technology.
Love that. That's exactly.
It's like one of the things that one of the first problems, like looking at it like from the context, like as in the times of Noah. So it's like, okay, I'm pushing into a different context space, and that the people, at least at that time, knew what it meant to say, as during the times of Noah, that they carried all their axioms to kind of paint onto that verse, because it takes a very different context in as you shift through time. Like I said, and that's one of the reasons why I really believe that. So I'm really excited about this approach that we're working on, because I think that it has real merit in how information changes through time. Because a lot of these things are, to me, are actually kind of, and it's funny. There's a lot of parallels. There's a lot of physics paradigms in these systems. Like you have entropy, right? You have momentum. I mean, even if they're not explicitly built into the models, we can see that there's like even a time factor that they've realized in these models, that, and I don't know if it's they've caught enough of from the embeddings and just from the sheer amounts of information they have. But when you look at how information changes through physical systems, you're subject to the same physical properties that you have in other types of physics problems. So, like, we use tensors, which were a mathematical technique was developed during there's some conjecture about it, but Einstein used them to explain his geodesic physics principles about how energy can warp a surface, and and what all those properties mean, right? Like, and I believe that, like I said, that you can mirror a lot of physical systems and even understand these models in that way too. So to me, a lot of these things are based solidly on systems that we know from thermodynamics, those kind of things. I mean, we use, like I said, we use tensors in these representation spaces.
What's a tensor?
A tensor is a higher order vector. So a vector is just like a mathematical representation. You can think of it a line which has direction and magnitude. And a tensor is a higher order representation of that can represent something like spin. So I'm going in the direction of this, and then I can, there's another force acting out this way. So tensors they allowed us to create. We use them. A lot of them are used for like linear transformations inside these models, where we do like dot product matrices, those kind of mathematical representations. A lot of scientists say it's a very abstract way of representing information for language, right? Like that was I remember hearing somebody, I can't remember who they were talking about. It's like very weird to think of a tensor inside of language. But the more that you think about it, it's like, oh no, I think it really does. I think that there's orientation in language, like there's directionality as far as where the semantic regions map. So, like, all these kind of premises are still there. I believe it's on solid physics and mathematics. So, but it's just a weird interchange of this space where it correlates all these kind of different ideas. And so it's an exciting thing for me, because, um, it's for somebody who loves, like I said, who loves the sciences and loves, mathematical ideas, and um, to be able to figure out how language can be represented in higher order spaces and different lenses you can look at how they can be represented is a endless fascination to me.
Yeah.
Because as you can represent things in so many different ways. So, and trying to figure out what's the best way to represent and what's the best way to search those spaces is a very exciting place and time to be in for for science and human discovery that existed before. Representations, they couldn't be solved, through certain methods that we had. We had to go through approximations, and they solved them. Like to me, it's like, if you can do that in the short amount of time that essentially these large neural networks have been available. I mean,
Right.
how much human capital are you going to be able to take advantage of? Like, who may not have been in that realm, but just have a spark for that specific understanding. Like, how many people are out there that it puts them on the track to discovery?
Do you have any last thoughts or last words you want to share with us?
Yeah, like I said, we're located in Columbus, and we do a lot of event space. Don't let gatekeepers be the arbiters of truth in this space. It's granted the scientific process is a process. Science is not a theology. It's just a tool. If you can figure out ways to come about human discovery and still, I still hold true to what you believe, and not allow people to put limiters on you, then you live in a time that very few people have been blessed to live in. And I really, from that standpoint, that people dust off their old passions. You know what I mean? And say,
Yeah.
let's bring it back to the foray, because you have you have access to technology that's not been seen in human history that's generally available. Like I said, if I were as a note on that, you have, like I said, and I don't know what that means for like how the world's going to shift, but you live in amazing times, and take advantage of it while you can.
Thank you to everyone who tuned in. Appreciate it. We'll see you next time on the next episode of Interior Public. Thank you.